It's Hooptober time, so let's make a Hooptober list. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably know what Hooptober is, but in case you don't, Hooptober is an annual horror challenge on Letterboxd. It is run by this user here, Cinemonster, and each year he challenges us to watch 31 horror films that satisfy a certain number of criteria between the 15th of September and the 31st of October. I first took part in Hooptober 4 years ago, and I have done it every year since, so this is my 4th year. And yeah, I just really enjoy it because I find that it allows you to discover horror films that you wouldn't otherwise have watched. It allows you to tick off some blind spots, but also find some completely weird out there stuff. And I always look forward to it. It's one of my favourite parts of the year on Letterboxd. And one of my favourite parts is not just watching the films, but also making the list. That's often more enjoyable for me than watching certainly some of the films. And I always like, finding the criteria, seeing what can match up, and seeing how everybody else puts their list together and comparing, what did this person choose versus what did I choose, and how we can all satisfy the criteria in different ways. So with that in mind, we're going to make a list, and I have copied over the criteria from Cinemonster's list into a brand new list, and let's go from the top. So of course there should be 31 horror films, that's the name of the game here, and the next two criteria say that these should come from 6 countries and cover 8 decades of filmmaking. Now I personally choose to leave these two categories to the last because you will often cross them off by doing the other categories. I know not everybody does that. Some people want to have each category satisfied exclusively, so they don't like films overlapping. But for me personally, I don't mind an overlap. If I can get 31 films and some of them satisfy 2 or even 3 criteria, then that's fine by me. I also go for a criteria that they are all new films to me, so nothing on this list can be something I've seen before. Of course, you don't have to follow that, but I find that's a good way to certainly make it more of a discovery exercise. With that in mind, the first category I'm going to be looking at is all of the films from a horror franchise with at least 4 entries. And it's noted that if there is a reboot, you can choose whichever 4 that you prefer. Now, a lot of the big horror franchises, I have already seen some or all of the films, and therefore they would not be eligible under my criteria of only new films. So nothing from Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or Scream or anything like that is going to be on this list. So I looked at some different franchises and I narrowed it down to Critters and The Toxic Avenger. I did think about doing one like VHS because I really want to get into that franchise, but there's 7 films in that franchise, so it felt like it was going to take up quite a lot of my list. So I think I might just add VHS in at the end. So between these two, which both have, Critters has 5 and Toxic Avenger has 4, all 5 including the 2023 one, but that hasn't received a wide release anywhere yet, so I'm kind of not really counting it. Between the two, I couldn't decide. I just kind of flipped a coin and went for Toxic Avenger, partly because I think it just seems a bit more weird and out there, and that feels like a good enough reason to include it in a Hooptober list, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so we have the first 4 films in our list: The Toxic Avenger Part 2, Part 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie, and Citizen Toxie, The Toxic Avenger 4. Looking forward to getting into those films. I know, certainly the second, third, and fourth one are not supposed to be very good, but they're sort of renowned for having some very weird imagery and gore in them, so I'm looking forward to them nonetheless. The next criteria is one film by Wes Craven, so I have brought up his Letterboxd page here, and we can actually filter this to show, to fade the films that I've already seen. So obviously all of the Scream franchise, including the 4 that he did, Nightmare on Elm Street and New Nightmare are all taken, and The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the left. So the next most popular film he did was Red Eye, but I have seen someone do that in a previous Hooptober and say that it's not really horror at all, it's pretty much just a straight thriller. So although there's nothing wrong with doing that, and obviously horror is a genre that crosses over with many others, I'm going to try and keep to sort of a pure horror film, and so not pick Red Eye. And Paris Je T'aime is an anthology film, I believe, so not really, it's got many, many different directors, so not really in the spirit of things, and also not horror, so that's not included either. So I'm going to go for his next most popular horror, and that is The People Under the Stairs, so let's add that in as well. Next up, we have one film caused by or worsened by weather. Now, I saw a lot of people picking John Carpenter's The Fog for this criterion, which I think is a great shout. That's a really good film. I have seen it, so I won't be including it. I also thought Cruel from 2019 it would be a good shout for this, but again, I've seen that, so I can't include it. But if you haven't seen it, I would think about that when it takes place in a Cat 5 hurricane, I think, in Florida, and involves alligators, so it's a good fun one. But yeah, not for me for this one. I decided to go for Frozen, not that Frozen, the 2010 Frozen, directed by Adam Green. It's about people who get stuck on a ski lift during a snowstorm. I don't know why it just came to mind. I sort of have seen this thing on streaming services and never watched it, so it felt like a good opportunity to pick that one. Similarly, with the next category, one film starring a black woman, I just immediately thought of Ma, starring Octavia Spencer. Another one that I've seen around on streaming services and have never got around to watching, so I'm going to watch it this Hooptober. Next up, we have one Donald Sutherland film, and again, I have got up his Letterboxd page. And I have used the genre filter because if you look at any genre, he's been in some 200 films nearly, including The Hunger Games, which, yes, I haven't seen many of. Excuse me for that oversight. But if you filter it by genre, then you can see just his horror films. I'm going to go for Don't Look Now, which was already on my watch list prior to these criteria coming out, so it's good to tick off something like that when you can. Next up, we have 3 films from New World Pictures. Now, in the original list, Cinemonster provides a link to their Wikipedia page, so you may wish to use that to look there, but I prefer to look at it from the Letterboxd page, so I've just searched New World Pictures and it's got films produced by New World Pictures here. Again, I sorted by genre to only include horror. This one hasn't got my fade on. Let me put the fade on. So I've seen the Hellraiser films and I've seen Slugs. So these are the things that are left. I decided to go for Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, because it's not only one of their most popular, or their most popular horror film that I haven't seen, but also it's a horror comedy, so it ticks off the horror comedy, one of the horror comedy criteria as well. And then for another one, I kind of just looked around at the different options and I decided, I don't know why the stuff just wasn't appealing to me on the day that I initially made this list. So and Piranha, I feel like, I've seen the remake. It's pretty straightforward what goes on there, but House I've heard really good things about, so I wanted to include House, and I've also gone for Humanoids of the Deep, just because I love the poster. I think that's, those eyes look really ominous, so interested to see what comes from that. So let's include House, not the Japanese House, and Humanoids from the Deep. Next up, we have 2 Indian films. So again, this is something that you can search for on Letterboxd. You can search for films produced by India. As you can see, there is many, so let's narrow it down to horror. And the other thing about the way that Letterboxd includes countries is that, a lot of films are international co-productions involving more than one country, and therefore it includes a lot of films here that you would not really think of as Indian films, I think. So for instance, The Happening is an M. Night Shyamalan film with, it's in English, it's got an English cast, an American cast, but English speaking, it's set in America. For all intents and purposes, it's not really an Indian film in my opinion. So I've gone a little bit further down the list and I've gone for this one, which I'm hoping is pronounced Bulbul, and also this one, Shaitan, from just this year, 2024. So let's get those in the list. Okay, next up we have 4 Italian films. Italy, obviously a nation known for their horror output with the giallo subgenre. Again, I've got the world map up and gone to Italy, and then we will filter by horror. You can see I've already seen, again, Bones and All I wouldn't really count. I know it's a Guadagnino film, but it's really an American film, isn't it? Both the Suspirias are on here as well. I decided to go for some Argento, and so I have picked Deep Red and Inferno because I've seen a couple of Argento's films, but those ones are still on my to-do list, so let's get those in. Sometimes, by the way, I do try to pick a criteria of every film is a different director unless specified, so unless it says multiple films from a certain director. But I think when it's Italian horror, you may as well take the opportunity to see some Argento if you haven't. So consider that for your own lists. And then for a third film, I didn't want to get a third Argento in, so I've gone for this one, Santa Sangre, which is a Jodorowsky film. I hope that's pronounced correctly. We need one more Italian film. So again, Antichrist, I don't think that can be considered Italian really. Eyes Without a Face is much more French than it is Italian. Yeah. Funny Games, American remake, Red Dragon, I'm not going to pick any of those. So I think, Fenomena and Tenebrae are both Argentos, and I think so is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Yes, so let's go for Blood and Black Lace, which is a Mario Bava film. Bava? Let's get that in there. Again, another sort of big name in Italian horror, so no issues with getting him in involved. Okay, next up we have 2 horror comedies. Now, as I said, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark is already a horror comedy, so I'm only going to pick one more horror comedy. I mean, if I end up picking another one, it doesn't really matter, but I'm only going to need one more. And to that end, I'm going to go for Beetlejuice, because that is coming out. In fact, it's out as I make this video, so I'm keen to go and see it once the challenge starts. No issue with putting in films that are coming out in cinemas. I think it's actually a great way to sort of include some modern stuff, if you can see it in the cinema, you know, we all know that's the best way to see things, generally speaking. So yeah, Beetlejuice is my other horror comedy. Next up, we have 2 films made primarily or entirely in Texas. I did consult an online list of horror films set in Texas for this, and obviously ticked off the ones that I've already seen, like the first 2 Texas Chainsaw Massacre films. I'm going to go for a Rob Zombie film, and that is House of a Thousand Corpses. Haven't seen it. I have seen his Halloween films, but not his... I don't think any of his original works. So yeah, keen to have a look at that one. And I'm also going to go for Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, because I have not seen that. Next up, we have one film that exists in at least 2 available cuts, and it does say you just have to watch one, although a bonus if you watch them all. Again, I looked this up. It's not something you can sort of easily search on Letterboxd, and one that struck me was Mimic by Guillermo del Toro. So that's going in, and I will probably watch his director's cut. I doubt I'll have time to watch the theatrical cut as well, but I'm keen to see the director's cut. Next up, we have one Robert Wien film. Is it Wien or Vienne? I confess I don't know. It might well be Vienne because he's German. I have seen Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. If you haven't seen that, this is the obvious time to go and watch that film. It's an absolute classic of horror and German expressionism. But as I have seen that, I will just go for his next most popular film, which is The Hands of Orlac. So that goes into the list. Next up, we have one Michel Soavi film. Again, might be pronouncing that wrong, apologies. So I've also brought up his page, and I'm going to go for his most popular film, which is Cemetery Man. And it seems like almost everybody is putting Cemetery Man on their list, which is, you know, that often happens in Hooptober. There's one criterion where it is so obvious which film to pick that everybody does. I've yet to see, I think, a list without Cemetery Man. So clearly it's the one to see. There we go. Okay, we're getting to the end of the criterion now. So we have one film from 2011. Again, this is something you can search for on Letterboxd. You can pick decades, and then within the decade specify the year, and then specify the genre as before. So I've got 2011 horror up here. If I put the fade on as well, we will see some of the films that I've seen and therefore cannot be included. I'm just going to go for the most popular one, and that is The Skin I Live In, which also happens to have very good ratings. It's an Almodovar film. So we're going to include that. That's also going to help us out later with the countries criterion, incidentally. And then one from 1984. Now, technically, The Toxic Avenger is from 1984, so I could just use that as my 1984 film. It's a bit of good fortune for me. But for the sake of things, I will include another 1984 horror. So let's see what we can include. So it is actually the most popular 1984 horror that I haven't seen. Oh, and equally Chud, which is a New World Pictures one, so you could have a crossover there as well. You know what, I think I'm going to go for The Company of Wolves. It looks like a Red Riding Hood / possibly werewolf type deal, starring Angela Lansbury, so let's go for that. And there's my 1984 film. Okay, so those are the criteria fulfilled. Oh, sorry, I've got to also add the one Toby Hooper film. Of course, there must always be a Hooper film in Hooptober, so let's get that up. Again, you can see I have seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Poltergeist, TCM2, and Life Force. Salem's Lot I do want to watch at some point, but it's a mini-series and sort of condensed into a film or cut into a film, so it's very long, I believe. Yeah, over 3 hours. I will watch it at some point, but not in this Hooptober, I don't think. So I'm going to go for his next film on the list in order of popularity, and that is The Funhouse. So there we go. And if we look at the number of films we have 26 in so far, so we're already pretty much filled up the list, but we do have to check countries and decades. Let's start with decades. We have films from the 80s, 2000s, 90s, 2010s, 70s. That's 5 decades so far. The 2020s makes 6 decades, the 60s makes 7 decades, and the 20s makes 8 decades. So we are already covered on the decades number. Countries, let's think. Well, you always have the USA. It's pretty much, you know, impossible to make such a list without the USA involved. So the USA is there. We have obviously the Indian and Italian films from the criteria. So that's 3 countries. The Hands of Orlac is an Austrian film, so that's 4 countries. The Skin I Live In is a Spanish film, so that's 5 countries. Company of Wolves might even be from the UK. Yeah, Country of Wolves is from the UK, so that is 6 countries. So we're already there. We already have 6 countries and 8 decades, so that's nice. So that's what I mean, you know, you've already covered it off. For the sake of it, I will add in a couple of more, you know, foreign films, because it's always good to watch some of those. So I'm going to watch Eyes Without a Face, which is a French film, although as we saw earlier, it's Italian co-production, but pretty much a French film. And I'm going to add in some Japanese horror, because you can never go without Japanese horror, so I'm going to put in some that were on my watch list already, Onibaba and Kuroneko. I'm keen to see both of those. Then I said that I would put in VHS, because I've been wanting to start that franchise for a long time, and it seems like now is the time to do so. And I'm going to include Leprechaun 3. Now that might seem like a completely random choice, but it's because one of my friends recommended it. I have seen the first Leprechaun, and a friend of mine said you don't have to watch them in order, and number 3 is worth a look. It's the one set in Vegas. So there we go, I'm going to include that. I'm tempted to find space in here somewhere for Smile 2, because I'm probably going to watch that in the cinema during October. I could potentially maybe remove Kuroneko, put Smile in there, you know, just to get that in there. So that is my list. Now, of course, Cine Monster always gives us some extra credit films to watch. You can watch Cyclone and Crawl Space and We Are Zombies. I typically find myself almost running out of time or running out of time for Hooptober, so I don't normally include the bonus films, but feel free to do so in your own lists. And if I do somehow have time, I will maybe try and check them out. But yeah, that's how my list is looking. So let's have a look at the final list. Okay, so here we are. We have the final list. I have copied out the criteria into the description and written underneath the films that satisfy each criteria. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think the list looks great. Loads of things on here that I'm excited to check out. Some stuff that I've heard of and been wanting to see for a while. Other stuff I would never have watched otherwise. And I'm very much looking forward to getting underway. I've given my list a silly title, Hooptober 11, Welcome to Hell, with the 11 as L's. It's pretty lame, but you can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a pun. I don't know, there's something I like to do. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. As we can see, you have watched 0. Oh, make sure you use these tags as well, by the way, Hooptober and Hooptober 11, to help people find your list. And then if you're a Pro or Patreon member, use YIR 2024 to make it appear in your end of year stats, which is something I always like to do. And yeah, watching begins on the 15th of September. We've got to try and review them all as well. I'm looking forward to it. If you want to come and find my list and give it a like, that is my username up there. You'll have seen it throughout the video. I did publish this a little while ago, hence why it's already got some likes. And yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody else's list, to getting going with the film watching, and to see how I feel at the end of it. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, but thanks for watching mainly, and I will maybe do an update video at the end of Hooptober. We'll see. Cheers.